Pay attention, folks. Today's July 20th, 2011, and today, the Bilderberger Prophecies by Michael Fazio brings you a picture of Satan as is depicted on the reverse of the $1 bill. Because today, I am going to show you how when you bring the God Pod and the evil seed of death together, like you bring two pieces of nuclear fissionable material together, they form a nuclear detonation. That is the representation that has been depicted on the reverse of the $1 bill. And today I am going to show you Satan itself on the reverse of the $1 bill in a series of pictographs that were placed there 20,000 years ago by something we would consider alien, and has a remnant society controlling that series of pictographs and what happens in time. I am telling you today that everything that has ever happened in the government has been planned out to the day, probably very close to the hour that these events take place, including the book of Revelation and the book of Genesis depicted on the pictographs of the reverse and obverse of the $1 bill. I am telling you, there can be no question this is happening, because no theologian, no scholar, no entity on earth has come forth to challenge my views. They only say I'm crazy. That might be so, but it doesn't make me wrong. And here is a picture of Satan to prove that I might be crazy, but I'm not wrong, folks. Here is a picture of a Satan-like or demon-like being on the reverse of the $1 bill. And look, you see, it has eyes, it has a nose, it also has horns that face down, it has a mane like a lion, it has three individual faces inside the picture of Satan itself, or the Luciferian nature of this. And how I have come to the conclusion that this is drawing near for us in time is I can tell you that when you have a $1 bill and the God Pod and the evil seed of death are separated, you cannot see Satan, because there is time in between the God Pod and the evil seed of death. But we are running out of time. In Congress today, the Congress, the abomination that is represented in Matthew 25:15, the abomination in the White House that has been proven that he's an abomination, because the only time in Illinois state history that the number 666 came out was the night Obama got elected. Can't be a coincidence, folks. 35 years in the history of this world, and that day 666 comes out. It was not only was it a sign, it was probably a planned event by the entities that placed the pictographs themselves on the reverse of the $1 bill. And to prove all of this is true, they placed an entity that looks like Satan, or Satan-like in nature, on the reverse of the $1 bill. And to prove to you that this is Satan even further, you know that you can only see Satan when you turn his world upside down. So let's turn his world upside down and see if the true nature of Satan still exists. And lo and behold, folks, this is the true nature of the Satan-like entity that appears on the reverse of the $1 bill, that can be seen once you bring the two halves, or the two voids, or the two compasses, or the two circles together that represent the God Pod and the evil seed of death. Once these two circles are brought together in this nature, where you can see that they have been brought together, this entity appears. This little entity that doesn't appear to be much is the Satan-like entity that exists on the reverse of the $1 bill when it's folded properly. However, as I just said, this entity has more detail than you could possibly comprehend, proving that it is Satan-like in nature because it has horns. It has three sets of horns. That's right, not one set of horns, but three sets of horns. Here is a set of horns, here is a set of horns, and here is a set of horns. Right here. Right here is a set of horns. A set of horns. A set of horns. There are 3 sets of horns that are representation of the 3 faces of Satan that exist on the reverse of the $1 bill. Here is a set of eyes. Here is a set of eyes. Here is a 3rd set of eyes. And now I am going to zoom in on this pictograph and show you how detailed this Satan-like entity actually is by showing you the horns. And when I zoom back out a little bit, I'll show you one face. When I zoom back out a little bit more, you will see 2 faces, and the body of the entity that we perceive to be Satan start to appear. And here is the entity that we perceive to be Satan in its entirety. When you bring the God pod and the evil seed of death together, when these 2 entities are brought together like 2 halves of a nuclear detonation, when these 2 halves are brought together, or 2 halves of one object are brought together, it forms a Satan-like entity in the central part of the reverse of the $1 bill. But none of this can be seen when you take a $1 bill and show somebody it in its full scale or regular one-on-one scale. You can't see any of this, folks. Nothing is shown. It's made like that because it was made by an entity that which we could not begin to comprehend. The entity that placed the 3,300 pictographs on the reverse of the $1 bill, that created all of these pictographs, the God pod, the evil seed of death, and a codex between the Bible and the $1 bill, is not human. It might be alien. It might be a remnant society from a million years ago that existed on Earth, and we are their children. But it wasn't some guy with a 12th grade education in the United States Mint that had no understanding of cartographic mapping. He had no understanding of Mercator projection. He had no understanding of geometry. He understood geometry on a basic level. The man understood geometry on a basic level. But this isn't geometry on a basic level. This form of geometry is known as sacred geometry. There might be 5 people on Earth, maybe less, that can make sacred geometry work. But moving past that, even if there were 5 people that could make sacred geometry work, I can tell you right now that there aren't 5 people that can create. There aren't 5 people on this planet that can create Euclidean optics. That's right, folks. There aren't 5 people on this planet that have the ability to create Euclidean optics. And whoever created, whatever created, however, whatever created the pictographs on the reverse of the $1 bill had full knowledge of Euclidean optics. And to prove that to you, this is what they made. These are the pictures that they made and placed on the reverse of the $1 bill. Among the pictograph that is depicted in this portrait, that is depicting the book of Revelation. This picture shows you from chapters 1 through 6 the words and verses of the book of Revelation laid out from one point of view in this particular pictograph. This pictograph represents the God pod and the evil seed of death, which represents the book of Genesis on the left-hand side and the book of Revelation on the right-hand side. Whether or not you choose to believe that these things exist is of little or no consequence. They are there. I have explained them. I explain them in a loud voice because I'm half deaf and because some people say they can't hear the videos. However, moving into the picture that represents Satan itself, I'm going to end up on this portrait, which is Satan-like in nature, can't be deciphered for anything other than evil in nature because of the horns that exist on either side of the eyes, because of the Satan-like caricatures of horns that are emitted. The fact that it doesn't have hands and feet per se doesn't mean that it doesn't represent Satan. Who on earth has ever proven to any degree at all that Satan has arms and legs? Folks, I'm going to tell you this again. I'm going to say it again. There is a representation of Satan on the reverse of the $1 bill, and this is the representation of Satan. Now, if anybody wants to argue this point with me, that's fine. But I am going to tell you that you better come prepared, because I, like Popeye, am the speaker of truth. The Michael Fazio for President, speaker of truth. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I am going to tell you that someone is going to come along and grant me a bigger camera.